If you'll do me a favor and ask your neighbor, are you ready to wrestle?
Ready to wrestle.
You'll ask one more person, are you ready to wrestle?
Ready to wrestle.
Hey, are you ready to wrestle?
Jacob has a challenging reputation in history that even starts with his name. If you can imagine being born into the world where as soon, even before you come out of the womb, you are thought to be a circumventor, a supplanter, a trickster. If you could imagine that from the time you came into earth, breathed your first breath, that your parents, your siblings, your community's view of you is that you would be one who latches on the heel of others. It's even in his name. And to that end, he steals his brother's birthright. He manipulates his father, takes advantage of his vulnerable situation. He comes to be known as a liar, a trickster, a schemer, a manipulator. And even finds himself, because of the spirit and energy that he walks around with, being tricked and taken advantage of by others. And for one reason, one way or the other, he always finds himself trying to get over. But more than the what of Jacob, I also wanted to look at how he got there. First, we have to take into account that his parents had a history of engaging in trickery themselves. Oftentimes, when his parents would find themselves in trouble or in a jam, they would lie to the kings or rulers that they would engage with because they were afraid that they would be separated, that they would be taken advantage of. And so Jacob didn't get here by himself. As a matter of fact, this thinking and this mindset to operate out of fear, to trick and manipulate and scheme your way through life, it had been handed down from his parents. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that it was his mother that called him and enticed him to plot and plan so that he could lie to his father and steal from his brother. Too often when we look at this story, we ignore the circumstances by which Jacob becomes the Jacob that we know. I don't want to point out that this is the same Jacob who becomes Israel. I don't want to deal with that yet, that the 12 tribes, that the people of God, that this becomes God's chosen guy. Yet his beginnings are crooked, shady, shifty, and filled with problems. In fact, it would be easy to believe or suggest that Jacob was raised to believe that while God was present, he would not come to our aid. That while God was real, he would not provide for us. That while God loved us, he had his favorites. And that the only way that we could get what we want is if we used our own devices. Now, it's easy for us to look at Jacob as we sit in our pews in our nice suits and clothes and look at his story and maybe lower a brow, maybe scowl, maybe say, oh, Jacob, how could you do it? But if we were truthful with ourselves, many of us are still walking around with the mindsets that have been cast on us from birth. Many of us are still walking around dealing and struggling through the relationship with God that our parents taught us. And it wasn't that they did everything wrong, but it's that some of the things that they did and some of the ways that they moved did not hold up against what they were saying, who God was and how God called us to be. That the parents that we saw on Sunday were not the parents that we saw Monday through Saturday. That the things that we learned that were supposed to be right didn't always seem to go that way. That the folks that talked about being faithful and trusting God and leaning on his everlasting arm, sometimes we saw them trick, sometimes we saw them scheme, sometimes we saw them lie, because what they said they believed about God, they actually did not. And so now many of us find ourselves like Jacob, knowing that God is real, but not always trusting that he is going to deliver. Knowing that God loves us, but think maybe he loves somebody else more than us. Knowing that God is able, but if the rubber meets the road, I'm going to have to do what I got to do to get what I want. But you didn't get there by yourself, because somebody taught it to you. Somebody taught it to me. Somebody taught it to all of us. And so if we can be kind to Jacob, maybe we can be merciful to ourselves. Now, this is an interesting perspective to have because of all that God had done for Jacob, for his parents, and for his foreparents. If we remember, Abraham is the father of nations. If we remember, God kept Isaac through all types of turmoil, even when they didn't fully trust him. It's a hard perspective to understand because we know what God has brought us from, what he's kept us through. We know that he brought us back after a stroke. We know that he paid bills when we did not have money. We know that when we did not know where to go, we know how good he is. He's over and over showed us his faithfulness, over and over shown us his love, over and over. He's chosen us when we did not choose ourselves. And so it's interesting that we've developed this relationship with God that sometimes doesn't trust him, even though he's never let us down. It's even peculiar because in spite of their trickery, in spite of our foolishness, in spite of our selfishness, in spite of our manipulation, in spite of our lack of faith, God continues to keep us, provide for us, love us, heal us, and open up doors. What is even more peculiar is that every time we found Jacob or his foreparents operating and moving out of fear, the thing that they thought that they should be afraid of turned out to be okay.